Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
It's time for the Rick Smith Show.
I want you to get up now. I want all of you to get up out of your chairs. I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore.
I don't want to abolish government. I simply want to reduce it to the size where I could drag it into the bathroom and drown in the bathtub.
You bet I cut the taxes at the top.
How dare you? How dare you? Go ahead. Make my day.
The Rick Smith Show starts now.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here. The big boycott, the State of the Union. Look, at the end of the day, no matter what comes out of the nectarine Nero, the tangerine Tiberius, the marmalade Mussolini, no matter what comes out of his mouth, within a very short period, one news cycle, he's going to completely blow it out of the water anyway. So why bother watching, and why bother giving the ratings? I mean, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. If no one watches, it's still going to be the most watched State of the Union ever. It's going to be tremendous. It's going to be the most bestest, greatest, fabulousest thing ever. It'll be huge. And the question is the call, the expected call for unity, does he really buy it? Or is it just, well, something that someone said, hey, this would be nice to say? So much of that. And we're going to talk about the state of the nation. Where are we as a country? What's going on? Why are we in the mess that we're in? And the big story of today is the freak out by health insurance and by healthcare companies over this big announcement that you're going to have Berkshire Hathaway, Amazon, and JP Morgan Chase firing up a healthcare company. Now, they claim, I guess, from the very scant little details that we have, it's just going to be for their companies, but we're talking big companies. And the other fear is that, look, everybody in the pharmacy game's worried that Amazon fires up, that Amazon takes over the pharmaceutical industry, the sales part of it, and Dr. Alexa, prescribes you your pills at will. You've got it right in the house. Everything is moving towards this. And I mean, part of the question is, would you feel comfortable going to a computerized doctor? Because you can see where this is kind of going, where you've got these tech people who are, they're getting into it. Now, the thing is that kind of piqued my interest. It was the idea that they're starting this healthcare company and that the new entity would, quote, be free from profit-making incentives. And I've been saying that for a very long time. Healthcare should not be about profit. It should be something that we do for ourselves collectively, one giant insurance pool. This sounds like a private sector version of that. Would you be better okay with that, a private sector version run by the richest people in the world, or a government of for and by we the people? And this is really the question of our day, because it's been 40 plus years of telling us how horrible government is, and every time you turn on the 6 o'clock news, being hammered with this government investigation and that, without ever taking a real hard look at what corporate America gets away with. I argue they're just as bad, if not worse. I would argue even probably worse because of all the stuff that we don't see. Now, what Warren Buffett said, the key quote of the day, the ballooning cost of healthcare act as a hungry tapeworm on the American economy. Buffett says our group does not come to this problem with answers, but we also do not accept that it's inevitable and that they can do something. And now, again, no real details, which sent the market into a tizzy. And the thing is healthcare is front and center on just about everyone's mind. In fact, there was a new Morning Consult survey just out that pointed out. It asked the question, how important is it that President Trump discuss the following issues in the State of the Union address? Guess which one was the number one? Obviously, it's healthcare, because that's what I'm talking about. 82% said that is an important issue, want him to talk about healthcare. Because, the thing is, and this is one of those things that just kind of blows my mind. Other polls as well. I mean, the Kaiser Family Foundation tracking poll. Among registered voters, 29% say it's the most important issue in this upcoming election, in these congressional elections. Because here's the weird thing. Most people, after all these years, I still don't think most people get that the Affordable Care Act and Obamacare are the same thing. And that the ACA plans and Obamacare are the same thing. And this poll, this Kaiser Family Foundation poll, found that 36% of the people that they talked to were not aware that the Republicans gutted the individual mandate. So you're talking over a third of the population. In fact, they pointed out that 46% of Republicans incorrectly think it's still in effect. And you look at this and you go, wow, how are you not paying attention to what this administration's done to harm what's going on? Now, there's also part of me that has hope, because in the same Kaiser Family Foundation tracking poll, they say, who's responsible for the current state? You've got Trump and the Republicans who have made these changes. They've gutted the individual mandate, which is certainly going to have the healthier people leaving, and quickly. Who do you blame? Do you blame, Trump and the Republicans for making the choices and making these changes and creating this chaos and all of this uncertainty? Or is it Obama's fault? And interestingly enough, overall, 61% of voters say that it's Trump's fault. Just 27% are blaming Obama. Of course, now among Democrats, it's 77% blame Trump, 14% Obama. Among independents, 62% blame Trump, 26% blame Obama. Among Republicans, 38%. And that's much higher than I thought it was going to be. 38% say Trump, and the Republicans are they've eaten it. They've bought this thing. It's theirs. They own it. It's their fault. While 49% of Republicans blame Obama, because they blame Obama for everything. And in this, this State of the Union, that's one of the issues that's front and center. During the campaign, he said, look, we're going to insure everybody. It's going to be great. We're all going to have the best health care. It's all going to be Cadillacs for everybody. And it's going to cost $12 a year. Again, showing how disconnected he is, because he was actually talking about life insurance as opposed to health insurance. And I know it's really tricky, that life and health thing. I know, really, really very tricky. But, these are really important issues. And while we're distracted with all of the insanity that's gone on, you look at the fact that the average everyday working person's being left behind. And the polling is showing this. The polling is showing that, especially on the healthcare issue, because rates are going through the roof, costs are getting out of hand, and it doesn't look like Washington's capable of doing anything. Look, I wasn't a huge ACA fan. I said it was a good start, a good step in the right direction. Let's get down that path. It's a way to make sure that people get access to care. In fact, millions more people had access, millions more people had coverage. And now, thanks to this GOP tax plan, you're going to have about 3.5 million more uninsured. And you go, I'm confused at what the point is. If you bought Trump's campaign pledge that everyone was going to be covered, what's he doing? And the reality is, I don't think he has a clue. He's on both sides of every issue, and this last year has really shown that. So anything he says in the State of the Union, I'll wait 24 hours, and I'm sure there will be a tweet to contradict it. But here again, it's another one of these things that we're being left behind, because you look at the tax bill. The tax bill overwhelmingly going to the very wealthy. And we knew that from the beginning, didn't we? I mean, honestly, did we not know that the spoils, if you will, were going to go to the well-to-do? Of course we did. And, the more you look at this, the more you just go, do Republicans really care about working people? And the answer is really no. The answer is they care about who's feeding their campaign coffers. They care about where the next campaign contribution's coming from. They don't care about average, everyday working people. And they haven't for a very long time. And look, I'm not going to let the Democrats off the hook either. They haven't either. There's policy we could have been pursuing from the beginning. This could have been public option at the minimum. The very minimum. And I remember back when this was going on saying that you have to have that public option. Now, they brought Medicaid in, and Medicaid was kind of the public option, but that's what got stripped out by the Supreme Court, so bye-bye public option. If you wanted true choice, that would have been the way to go, I think, as opposed to where we are now. And I think we'd be much further down the road to making sure that everyone had coverage, and we were starting to rein in some of the insanity. Now, you look at what these three captains of industry are doing. Is this benevolence? Is this them saying, hey, we can make sure we're going to be the government that isn't working? Or is this them saying, hey, we're a bank, we're an insurance, we're one of the biggest healthcare companies in the world, and we're a sales distribution outlet. There's huge profit to be made here. Now, I know they're saying that, we're going to do this without, the constraints of having to make profit. I don't buy it. So it will be interesting to see how the massive downfall, because there were some big losers today, and some big names: Express Scripts, Cigna, CVS, Anthem, United Healthcare, McKees, and Cardinal Health. A number of them saw big drops because of this news. Because everyone's going, "Oh, Amazon's coming to town! Look out!" So it's going to be interesting to see what happens with this announcement as more details come out. And I know I'm interested to see where it goes. But here again, we need leadership in Washington. We need leadership in state houses across this country to make sure that people have access to good quality care. And I don't know if we're going to hear that in the State of the Union. I'm sure that what we do hear about it will be wrong. This is an administration that has no problem lying. They have no problem not telling the truth. In fact, when you have other politicians saying that he's a pathological liar, I don't think I've ever heard that in my lifetime. And it is exactly what it is. So I'm interested to see how this goes. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Is healthcare the big issue? I mean, I thought we dealt with it. Is it the big issue? Or what else is there? Is it reducing poverty? Is it fighting terrorism? Is it, improving our infrastructure, improving education? Love to hear it. Rick at thericksmithshow.com. I'm going to take a quick break. When we come back, David Yankovic is going to be here, give us some of his thoughts on the State of the Union, where we go, where we are, what we do, and, how we do it. Quick break, right back.
10% of the people own 90% of the wealth. Where do you fit in? Take a look at yourself. 10% of the people own 90% of the wealth.
Where smart policy and sound investment matters. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 2011. That was the day California first celebrated its state holiday known as Fred Korematsu Day of Civil Liberties and the Constitution. Born on January 30th, 1919, Fred Korematsu was among those victimized by President Roosevelt's wartime Executive Order 9066, mandating Japanese-American internment. Born in Oakland, California, Korematsu worked as a shipyard welder. He was arrested and eventually convicted after refusing to report to authorities for internment. The ACLU took up his case, hoping to test the legality of 9066. Korematsu and his family were relocated to the Central Utah Wars Relocation Center in Topaz, Utah. There he worked 8 hours a day for $12 a month and waited for his case to travel through the legal system. It eventually reached the U.S. Supreme Court. In Korematsu v. United States, the court held that compulsory exclusion, though constitutionally suspect, is justified during circumstances of emergency and peril. After his release, Korematsu worked odd jobs and faced discrimination and wage theft. He eventually resettled in Oakland with his wife and children. In 1983, Korematsu's conviction was finally vacated. 15 years later, he was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom. He became a tireless activist for civil liberties and worked to ensure internment could never happen again. Before his death in 2005, he served on the Constitution Project's Liberty and Security Committee. He warned, quote, "No one should ever be locked away simply because they share the same race, ethnicity, or religion as a spy or terrorist. If that principle was not learned from the internment of Japanese Americans, then these are very dangerous times for our democracy." Fred Korematsu Day is also celebrated in Hawaii, Virginia, and Florida.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. The Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out our website, thericksmithshow.com. So Nancy Pelosi's telling members of her Democratic caucus, if you want to walk out, don't come in. Don't make any noises. Don't do the Joe Wilson. Don't do any of that. Make sure the focus is on, quote, his slobbering self. And, that's good advice. Honestly, don't... I'm of the mindset you have to go because it is part of your job. You pay respect to the office and you let him trip all over himself. And then you use, obviously, what he says against him. Because like I said earlier, tomorrow, whatever he says tonight, he'll contradict anyway. But anyway, here to talk about the state of affairs, where we are as a country, where we need to go, what we need to do, our good friend David Yankovich. David, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, thanks for having me, Rick.
So, thoughts? Let him trip over his slobbering self, or have a Joe Wilson moment? Where are you?
I am just really excited to see Donald Trump become president of the United States again tonight. I'm waiting for that to be said. I mean, he's going to make a State of the Union speech where it's let's unite this broken country. I alone can do it. Someone's going to say that he became president. So I'm waiting. We should have like a bingo.
No, come on. No one, please, no one could possibly fall down that rabbit hole for the, umpteenth millionth time?
You want to bet?
Actually, no, I don't, to be honest. Now that I think about it, I'm sure there is someone who will go, he read so well.
That's, I'm reading an excerpt, of what he's going to say tonight. And, it's about unity and coming together and let's work on things, and it's funny because, I seem to recall the last year him doing everything he can to rip everybody apart. So it's definitely going to be an interesting night for sure.
So, the first thing in the morning, are we expecting tweets of lock her up and Hillary's email and all of that?
I'm sure that he'll go on a tangent. Maybe not tomorrow. Sometimes he has restraint, and he'll last a day, or someone will take his phone from him or something. But at some point, he'll immediately contradict himself. He'll attack the FBI. Try to fire Mueller, or do something. Yeah.
Now, you brought that up. What do you say to the Mitch McConnells of the world who say, we don't need to do anything Congress doesn't need to do anything. They don't need to, try and protect Mueller, because it's McConnell's view that there's no effort underway to undermine or remove the special counsel. Therefore, he doesn't see any need to bring up legislation to protect someone who appears to need no protection. What do you say to a McConnell?
At this point right now, like, the inevitable is coming down the mountain, right? At some point, Trump is going to fire Mueller, or he's going to do it, and it's almost like, let's light this candle. Let's see this constitutional crisis get to the breaking point, and let's do it. Like, I mean, it's been a year now, and everybody's kind of taken their sides and done everything on this or whatever, and at some point he's going to do it, and the government is going to have to find a way to work or find a way to collapse or whatever, but it's coming. So to the Mitch McConnells of the world and everything, apparently they don't read history or remember they've lived it. With Richard Nixon, he had a State of the Union where he used to call for an end of Watergate. The year that he was impeached, he resigned before he could be impeached. So, I mean, to Mitch McConnell and to the Republicans, they're on the wrong side of history. And they obviously haven't opened a book up. They haven't researched anything, but it's coming. It's all of this stuff's coming down the mountain on them, and they're playing the wrong hand here. I mean, it's almost as if they don't care about 2018 and the midterms and the elections. I mean, they're looking at numbers that, they're going to get beat up pretty good.
Yeah, which is why I think you see so many resignations and retirements and all of that. They know that the slaughter is coming, even with the country being as gerrymandered as it is.
They know that the slaughter is coming, yet they continue doing the same things, only worse. They're actually quickening the pace to try to push through as many bad things as they possibly can before they all get voted out. So it begs the question for me, like, what do they have planned coming into 2018 to either win or get around it, or are they just planning on just smash and grab and then they're all going to get voted out and be millionaires? I mean, what's the end goal here? No. Do they have some type of plan that they think they're going to win? Like, is that what this is? Because they're doing things like they think they have support.
And do we expect? And I hate bringing this up, but it's almost one of those things that you have to, because Trump in his pre-speech spiel said the only time the country unites is around when there's tragedy. And he says, I don't want that to happen, mind you, but that's the only time it seems to happen. And the fact that it came out of his mouth, to me, it's like everything else. Anything that goes in his ear comes right out his mouth. Is this something that he's heard? I mean, am I making any sense on that? I mean, because I got to be honest, I was freaked out when I read that.
Well, it freaked me out too. I don't think that you're sounding too crazy about it or whatever. I mean, if you look at all the things that Trump has said, they've all come true, right? There's a precedent for this as well. Under John F. Kennedy's administration, they tried to do the Operation Northwoods and that stuff, where they did a domestic terrorist attack or wanted to, and blame it on Cuba to give reason for us to go in. And the president, rejected that proposal and fired the people who were behind it in the 1960s. So this is actually, that's something that this government has put forth before. That really scares me. And it really scares me that he says things like that. And the thing is that a lot of people don't realize, especially on the right, everything he says is broadcast all around the world. So other countries are paying attention to the fact that we're completely divided. They're paying attention to the fact that, everything is going rough, the healthcare, people are being deported, the walls. Like, they're watching all this. They know that there's wedges that they can do. They know there's a president who's not paying attention, who's asleep at the switch. They know that, when they're making deals and things like that, they have momentum. They have a wedge to do something with here.
Yeah.
And that's the problem that I have the biggest with Donald Trump, is he isn't a president. He's not doing his job. He's not helping people. He's not supporting this country as much as he tries to sell that he is. I mean, just think about the golf thing. How many times did he tweet about Obama playing golf? Normally, I wouldn't even care. But the fact that he spent, 20 times more than Obama did the first year, all that adds up.
To be honest, David, Obama did have a crashing economy. We were losing 1 million jobs a month when he took over, and the economy was really in free fall. He did have a lot to do. There was a lot of work to do. A lot of shoveling, a lot of backbreaking labor to kind of get us back to somewhere on the right path. Now, the stimulus that they put forth, I was in favor of. I wish it had been bigger. I wish it had been better targeted. But still, Obama is the one who helped get us out of the mess that a Republican created. And I would argue right now you've got another Republican in Trump doing the exact same things that Bush did to get us into the Great Recession again. And I fear we're heading towards that. We're heading towards that cliff again.
I mean, I would agree. I remember, back when Bush was president, I was really struggling. It was really rough. And banks would be able to hold your overdraft charges on you for up to 3 months. And I remember one paycheck, I was supposed to make, it was like $900 or something, it wasn't very much. And when I got the paycheck, I had like $47. The rest of it was sucked up by overdraft charges that they hit me at the last second. What they would do is if you get like a soda, if you, $1.99 transaction, whatever, it would all add up and they would do it at the same time and overdraft you and hit you over and over and over. Obama stopped that from happening. And, a lot of the things that Obama put into place when he became president, Trump is rolling back. A lot of the banking regulations, a lot of the laws and things that he passed in the first days of his, administration, Trump has rolled back. So when you say we're heading for a recession, I can't imagine that we wouldn't be. And the stock market, it's just like cryptocurrency, it's at a really high level right now, but it can only coast for so long. And then, we're going to have an Enron, and then we're going to have, things like that are happening. And, I mean, it's not good. We have a president who is completely asleep at the switch and spends more time arguing on Twitter than he does being president.
Now, let me ask you this, because you talked about the wedge, that people think that there's a wedge in this country, and that I would argue Donald Trump exploits that wedge at every opportunity. His CIA director, Mike Pompeo, has come out and said, look, he fully expects the Russians to interfere in the 2018 elections like they did in 2016. And I find that an interesting statement coming from Trump's CIA director when you have Trump himself saying there was no meddling, there was nothing going on in 2016. It seems to be an interesting position for Trump's CIA director to take.
Yeah, I wonder how long he'll be there for now.
I've asked that too, but it's one of these things where does Trump not even know what his own people are saying?
Well, I mean, I read Fire and Fury just like probably most Democrats did, and I've watched the news over the last year. He's been called a moron by his own people, his own cabinet. A toddler, like talking to a kindergartner. This is his cabinet. This is the way that they talk about him behind his back. So the fact that he doesn't know something, just when you're in a regular job, if you have a boss that's unbearable, doesn't listen, whatever, eventually you get to the point where you're like, well, I'm not gonna continue putting all this work into it and briefing and everything, or whatever, because they don't listen anyway. Maybe that's what this is. I don't know, but it's really scary because on one hand, Trump will completely contradict his vice president, his Secretary of State, his Attorney General, anybody who has a comment. He always has to have something else that he has to add to it, or just completely change. And again, other countries are watching this, and the fact that there's like a complete clampet White House, and we'll take advantage of it.
What's interesting to me, to be honest, is how the Republicans have really stepped into line. How they've lined up behind this guy, even though, during the campaign they're bashing him like crazy. I look at the guy that Trump chose to run the EPA, this Scott Pruitt. The guy who has his own skiff, has his own security detail, has spent just ungodly amounts of money on paranoia. He said, back during the campaign that, quote, Trump would, I think, take unapologetic steps to use executive power to confront Congress in a way that is truly unconstitutional. And, I guess it was just unearthed here recently, this statement. But, there were people who knew that during the campaign, and yet, as soon as he took office, they stepped right in the line, with the exception of Mitt Romney. I give him at least credit for walking away if he was offered anything.
I wonder sometimes what the Democrats would be able to accomplish if we could stay halfway in line the way the Republicans do. I guess the one thing that was good about the Alabama race is we got to see where their line actually was. So half of them won't back a pedophile. But besides that, they'll stay in line. What's happening right now with them, it's really scary. in the sense that we have a foreign nation that, by all accounts, 17 intelligence agencies say interfered in our election. Every couple weeks there's a news story that the Trump administration or a campaign colluded with them, had conversations with them that weren't reported. We know that, Kushner lied repeatedly on his FS-86, and Jeff Sessions lied under oath and committed perjury. And the Republicans stand in line to the point of obstruction of justice, of basic decency. I wonder what would happen if Richard Nixon was alive today. Because, everybody, that's like the bellwether, right? That's like the one person, the most corrupt politician that everybody can think of. But would he look at this and be like, what the hell? Or would he just be like, no, I get it, it's my party? It's a really scary time. And, the Democrats, they need to be able to hold the line a little bit better. When things come up, like the shutdown hurt our agenda a lot, and then they didn't back it up. They didn't stand for what they had to. And, I'm happy, because we got CHIP funded, but we lost a lot. And we have to be as tough as the Republicans are, with exceptions, but we have to be able to hold that same message and fight that hard, because they're willing to do whatever. They're willing to literally sell this country out.
Well, to be honest, they're willing to scorch earth. They're willing to nuke the whole thing.
Yeah.
And I don't know that Democrats are willing to go to that level. I truly believe that you have a faction of the Republican Party, and a very large faction, if you will, that would take everything down if they don't get their way. They're the kid who's going to not just take the ball, but puncture the ball so nobody ever gets to play.
My friend Randy, he had a line in one of his recent ads that really resonated with me, and it's, "We care about people and they don't." And that symbolizes everything to me. Like, they don't care about you. They don't care about your family. They don't care about your life, your child. They don't care if you live or die. All they care about is tax cuts and making more money. And Democrats, don't do the scorched earth stuff, and they don't go that hard because they know what the cost is to people out there. Maybe that makes us at a disadvantage. I want to see the Democrats fight. I know we're not going to win every one of them, but I would rather get knocked out and throw a punch rather than just stand there and be like, oh, shucks.
Yep, I'm right there with you. So let me ask you this, kind of the last line of questioning, because, everyone's anticipating Rosenstein being fired. Everyone's anticipating Mueller being fired. This coming crisis that, and to highlight what you're talking about, having, Democrats with spines and ready to take on the fight, could this be that moment that, and to use Trump's words, that crisis, brings people together? Could this be that kind of moment where the country and where at least Democrats get on the same page?
If this isn't that moment, then what the hell are we doing? If it is the point where a constitutional crisis is happening and the president is firing special prosecutors and obstructing justice, and Republicans are holding them accountable, and if that isn't that moment, then all the things we're fighting for is, we really need to be introspective about what our agenda is. At that moment, I think it's that point where it's like we have to take to the streets and protest. If it gets to that, it is. It has to be that point. That's the last point. After that, we go into dictatorship.
And then the real fight is making sure that Pence doesn't move us into a Christian version of Sharia law and bring all of the hateful stuff that comes with him. We've got our work cut out for it, don't we? We've got our work cut out for us, don't us?
Absolutely. But we knew that, right? We knew that when he got elected. We knew that in the transition. We knew that when his first, speech on Inauguration Day, the joint state of the union last year, whatever it was called. We've known this whole time that we have one hell of a fight ahead of us. We have one humongous fight that's one after another. And one thing that I wasn't counting on that has really stepped up is this resistance. When, I wrote an article basically the night that he got elected, and I wasn't counting on the fact that there were so many people who felt like I did out there who were just like, nope, I'm standing up. I don't care how long this takes. And that's my hope. I don't have hope really in the government. I don't have hope in political parties, but I have hope in these people. I see, parents crowdfunding, their health care for their kids, and people coming together and supporting, and, people going through depression on social media and people helping them. And so I mean, that's where we're at right now. Like, we knew it was going to be hard, and we're there for each other, and we keep fighting, and we're going to win.
There you go. David, I appreciate the time. I look forward to talking to you again. Have a great night.
All right. Thank you, Rick. Good luck.
Good stuff, man. Appreciate it. Again, as he said, look, it's going to come down to us. It's going to come down to you, me, our neighbors, everyone standing together and fighting back. Good stuff. Let's take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You listen to The Rick Smith Show.
I'm working all the time. It seems to me I could live my life a lot better than I think I am. I guess that's why they call me the working man.
Making the blue blood see red. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1992. That was the day the gravediggers of Chicago ended their 43-day strike. The United Press International's headline declared, "The dead will rest in peace now that Chicago area gravediggers have reached a tentative contract." The gravediggers were part of Service Employees International Union Local 106. The strike started on December 20th when workers at 4 Chicago area cemeteries walked off the job. At issue was wages, overtime, and health benefits. 22 other local cemeteries then locked out their workers. With the gravediggers on strike and locked out, more than 1,000 burials were delayed. The Chicago Rabbinical Society was able to get a court order for some of the burials to go forward due to Orthodox Jewish practice that requires burial within 24 hours. By the time the strike was settled, 300 burials were still waiting. Unless there is a labor dispute, grave digging is work that does not often find itself in the headlines. It is one of the many unsung types of labor that it takes to keep a big city like Chicago operating. In 1974, the famous radio host Studs Terkel published a book based on oral histories he had conducted with working people over the course of 3 years. The title of the book was simply Working. The book featured interviews that ranged from jazz musicians to pharmacists, farmers to welders. One of the most poignant interviews was with a gravedigger named Elmer Ruiz. Ruiz said, "I usually wear myself some black sunglasses. I never go to a funeral without sunglasses. It's a good idea because your eyes is the first thing that shows when you have a big emotion. Always these black sunglasses."
The most important issues of the day. This is The Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out our website, thericksmithshow.com. So the news, the AP today reporting that, remember former RNC head and former governor of Mississippi, Haley Barbour? Evidently, Haley says he's going to pay a fine after he was arrested for carrying a loaded handgun through an airport. Evidently had it in his briefcase, claims an assistant brought it from his car. It ended up in his briefcase. And then the chaos of the shuffling loaded firearm ended up in his briefcase as he walked into the screening at the airport. And I could only think, look, he's going to get a fine. No jail time, nothing like that. No beatings, didn't get shot. But I can't imagine if it would have been me or you or, heaven forbid, someone with a some additional melanin in their skin. Just kind of a thought. Anyway, let's find out what's going on around the world and in New York City. I've got Luke Vargas, Talk Media News. Luke, thanks for taking time for us.
Glad to be with you.
So, what do you think if you've flown on planes? What do you think would happen to you if you had a gun in your bag, small gun?
Well, it depends which state I'm in, or I feel like that's got to have something to do with it. Boy, I don't know. I don't get this country on guns, and I'm happy that I go to work in New York City every day. And I got to say, there's not a lot of hunting going on in Central Park, but I feel a lot safer going in and out of big office buildings and transit stations, things like that, and I feel like the gun laws have something to do with it. Yeah,
I just find it hysterical that I don't know how. I'm sorry, I just don't know how you walk into some place and you go, oh, I just didn't know my gun. I didn't know there was a gun there. You've got so many guns, you can't keep track of them.
Yep. That, God, I've never been a part of gun culture.
Yeah.
And I just don't understand it.
I'm with you. Let's figure out what's going on. Evidently, while Congress overwhelmingly said we should be imposing sanctions on Russia, I mean, in a huge way, like in the Senate, it was like 98-2. I think there were only 4 or 5 people in the House that voted against it.
Three in the House. I mean, what kind of, other than like naming a post office, that's like more controversial than saying that, Donald Trump's got to keep tightening the screws on Russia. And that was more than a veto-proof majority. And yet President Trump decides not to carry out the express wishes of that law last year and stops short of sanctioning more of these Russian entities close to the country's defense and intelligence sector here. And I think the rationale from the White House is so intellectually dishonest, because if you look at this law called the Countering America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Act, I printed out some portions of it today, and it specifically says these sanctions should be imposed to counter aggression. They are not meant as a deterrence mechanism. And yet deterrence is exactly what the White House, or the State Department actually, is claiming that they've accomplished and why they don't need more sanctions. So there's misrepresenting why Congress wanted these sanctions in the first place. Instead, the White House says, look, you were concerned about all these arms sales. You wanted us to impose new sanctions on countries that are buying Russian arms. Well, just because of our other sanctions, some of that behavior has already slowed down, so that should be good enough. But again, that's not what the sanctions bill was about in the first place. Right. And we actually heard this week from the CIA director, Mike Pompeo, who said Russia is likely to repeat its attempts to interfere in U.S. elections in this year's midterms. He said, quote, "I haven't seen a significant decrease in their activity." And that's another thing that this sanctions bill was drawing attention to. So again, there's no good behavior to really point to, and the sort of secondary benefits from past sanctions should be irrelevant if you just look at the letter of the law here. So it's a baffling move, and one that it seems the president is getting a lot of pushback on.
Yeah. So as I was looking at the two of those things that you just laid out there, I'm is there a Pompeo clock? Are his days numbered?
I'm trying to remember. There was some talk about the Tillerson exit and moving. Several months ago, I feel like there was a sort of 3 or 4 person switcheroo that was being talked about. I don't remember if the CIA director post was a part of that. And to be honest, it's a busy news day. There are parts of this story that there's an explanation that the White House can give to its admirers and probably bury this story. So I don't know if Pompeo's comments are so severe or will even reach the president's attention via Fox News that he'll get in trouble for it. But on another day, you'd think this would float to the top.
Yeah, you would think that this would be an important story. But you're right. There's so much. I mean, the big story outside of the State of the Union and me not watching it, obviously, is the big Amazon, Berkshire Hathaway, J.P. Morgan Chase. Hey, we're gonna start our own healthcare company.
We don't know all that much about it, though. The statements from Jeff Bezos and Warren Buffett are exciting, and those men move markets. I mean, you saw CVS, United Healthcare, Anthem, a bunch of companies pretty entrenched in that healthcare space and getting more involved in it. In the case of CVS, all plunged on Tuesday. Essentially, the sort of broad strokes of what we know about this is they say they're going to form some sort of independent healthcare company that's going to serve just their employees, though the ramifications of that on the broader market could be significant. These are big players. They say they want this to be a company that would be free from profit-making incentives and that they would be investing in technologies that are effective and affordable. And God forbid, there is a need for that. So many analyses of what's wrong in the American healthcare system point down to costs for services. And then, of course, those costs are anything but constrained as you put more and more middlemen like the Uniteds and the Anthems in between patients and their care providers. So I think this is an exciting announcement. Warren Buffett stressed over and over that they don't have the answers already, but they're going to put their collective resources behind this and get some talent and try and keep price rises in check. And I wish them the best of luck. And hopefully one day, maybe their efforts will start to change the rest of this industry.
Yeah, as the one article I read, Dr. Alexa, calling Dr. Alexa.
Hey, look, if it means, I have a good friend who is trying to automate parts of his family medical business's operation. And his mom is like a doctor, a neurosurgeon or something, but because of the amount of paperwork that they need to do in this family practice, they're doing like 30 years of data entry and not really actually, using all of our services. There's just so much of this industry which is stuck in 20th century, paper pushing and bureaucratic mess, and it needs to be shaken up as much as possible. And if Alexa plays a role in that, then albeit.
I agree. I agree. You get rid of all that paperwork. It would be so much easier if you didn't have all that. If you like, I went to the doctor last year. I went to the ER last fall, and just the amount of billing that comes out of one 4-hour visit was just it's like a small forest that was cut down because every person who you spoke to on the way to going somewhere else was sending you a bill, and it's outrageous.
Yeah. I don't know what to say. I was fortunate to grow up in Boston, and my family was pretty well to do, and we knew some people in healthcare, and I got set up when I was a kid with like kind of a boutique-y medicine practice at Mass General, and like 10 years before anybody else was talking about digital medical records, everything there was online. But because I don't live in Massachusetts anymore, a few years ago, I reluctantly gave up that coverage and transferred to doctors in New Jersey. And I said, look at this, I've got thousands of all these forms, really cool test results, like cutting edge. All my scans were in there for my whole life. And I said, can I just import this into your system? And they said, oh, well, we can accept up to 5 pages via fax, and the rest will just have to be printed and inserted into a paper record. And it was the most depressing thing to think this industry is just not moving towards this. I know the Affordable Care Act had some lofty long-term goals to try and move these insurance providers towards digital medical records, and of course that was never funded. And so again, we're stuck here with an outdated system, and prices are just going higher and higher.
Yeah, it's crazy. Let's get down to a new CNBC poll. Working people not seeing as much as they thought from the big GOP tax cuts. Anybody surprised by that?
I don't think so.
Okay.
But look, I take that back. Actually, in the course of my work, I call a lot of different radio stations around the country, and I have to say, a lot of people bought this whole "we're giving out a bonus for Christmas" hook, line, and sinker thing, saying, "Look, it's amazing how much businesses are changing." I mean, ignoring the fact that 40% of businesses a decade ago used to give out these bonuses anyways. This is like a basic practice that most companies ought to be engaged in, and yet they timed all their press releases just in time for the tax cut, and were paying lip service to President Trump, and people really thought they were connecting the dots there. But this CNBC poll does pull back a little bit. They interviewed economists, fund managers, and strategists in a new poll, and the new estimate is that only 12 cents on the dollar of these corporate tax cuts are going to go to workers compared to the 70 to 80 cents per dollar estimate that Trump administration economists had previously put out. Basically, assuming that everything just trickles down, they say only 12 cents on the dollar will make its way to workers. The same study said only 8% of those surveyed believe that workers will benefit the most from this tax cut, compared to 92% who said it would be shareholders or executives. And I will point out, I mean, the president is going to say a lot of great stuff about the stock market and all of this. It's worth pointing out the Federal Reserve estimates that less than half of Americans have any money in the markets whatsoever.
Yep.
Half of Americans have $0 invested in markets. That's no pension, no 401k, no IRA, no mutual funds, no ETFs, no regular stocks. And so this notion that, looking at the New York Stock Exchange average at the end of the day is the best way to gauge the health of the economy, again, it's just another distortion of the kind of indicators you should really be looking at when those don't look good. I mean, there's the savings rate American savings rate hit a 10-year low or something earlier this week. I mean, there's some bad news if you pull back the curtain a little bit.
And sadly, the way I've been looking at it, we're heading towards that next great recession that's just around the corner. And what we're doing is we're giving away any ability to react to the next crisis. We're putting ourselves further in debt by giving more to the very wealthy. While there were reports out that there have actually been more layoffs, as we predicted would happen. And our ability to react to the next crisis is going to be diminished as well, only going to make things that much worse. It's terrible stuff.
Yeah, and I would point out the NAFTA situation is getting pretty dicey as well. There was the most recent round of NAFTA talks wrapped up on Monday, and I watched the press conference with the trade reps from the U.S., Mexico, and Canada, and you'd think these folks would have a good working relationship after doing this for months. It is getting testier and testier every time they face the cameras. Robert Lighthizer, who's Trump's trade representative, is really confrontational, and I just don't see this wrapping up anytime soon. In fact, you've got these Mexican elections starting. The campaign starts in April. The goal was to try and finish this whole NAFTA thing last year. Then they said late March. Now that doesn't even look like they'll get it done this year. And who knows what the new Mexican administration is going to want. And I think that's another hit to markets. And I think folks within the administration and business lobbyists are smart to try and re-explain the threat of dumping NAFTA to Trump in terms of the stock markets. The only thing that he seems to be able to understand, we've heard that the Chamber of Commerce and automakers and others they gave up on just trying to explain trade to Trump and just said, look, if you get rid of NAFTA, the stock market will go down. So perhaps NAFTA will be salvaged, but on a relatively flimsy line of explanation to the president if it happens.
Yeah, but the sad thing is the status quo can't stand either. So we've just wasted yet another year of nothing getting done, and all of the bad things from NAFTA just being exacerbated. I don't know that he's going to pull out of it, but to be honest, I think he's starting trade trouble all around the world without having really a clear direction, and that's the frustrating part of this. I don't really think he has a clear understanding of what the plan is, and that's really troubling.
Sure, and I think when we saw the president at Davos last week, the words I used to describe it was free trade envy. I mean, he was there, and you had the TPP getting wrapped up, or the TPP replacement deal, and Trump in his speech, like out of nowhere, in words that like 24 hours before would have seemed absolutely impossible for him to utter, said, look, I'm willing to negotiate with the TPP countries one-on-one or as a group if people think that would be best. He's just reversing himself on trade every day. And when he tries to go long form in this CNBC interview that you can read, the transcript yields absolutely no insights or suggestions that this guy knows really what his position is. It's just this was bad. I'm going to make it good, but there's not a lot of clarity there, and that will spook markets. And I think it already is.
Yeah, I got to be honest with you. I can't read his speaking. It makes me it makes me feel like I'm getting dumber because there's no real sentence structure. There's no structure, and there's no coherent thought within a sentence. It's too hard to read. It's too hard to look at. It's just too hard to read. I'm sorry.
Well, yeah, you begin to see how rhetoric can be used to manipulate minds when you see the words on the paper, and then you watch the same interview on TV. I mean, he's not like you hear words he's not saying necessarily, but you kind of do. I mean, it's depressing to admit that even though it might be incoherent in its purest form, when there is the visual element and he's gesticulating and saying certain phrases, you start to cut him more slack, and I think that is a scary thing when all the rest of it can cover over the fact there's not much meat on the bone.
Yeah, it's crazy. Lastly, there's some good news, I guess, coming out of North Korea. What's going on there?
It's a phrase I don't say very often, and one that President Trump will probably bury in his speech tonight. But the Air Force General, who's the vice chair of the Joint Chiefs, General Paul Selva, has come out and said that the United States does not believe North Korea has a full intercontinental ballistic missile program, that we have been studying their launches. They, of course, can fire a missile very far. They can point it east, west, north or south, but they do not have advanced targeting of the sort that would be needed to hit things far away, and they don't have re-entry technology. So you could put a payload in space, but you're not going to be able to bring it down to the Earth's surface in one piece. And that's a similar conclusion that James Mattis, the defense secretary, came to last year. The question here is, I think, on the political leadership. Defense and Intel are on the same page here, saying this is not imminent risk to the United States, but that is not what political leaders, namely President Trump, have been saying. So the question, I think, is, what do you do with this? Do you take this as sort of a really welcome moment to de-escalate and to say, okay, we got ourselves worked up. We started saying things about war. Now let's dial it back. We realize we have a little time. Let's make, sane decisions and not panic. Or just, does President Trump ignore this and keep implying that missiles are going to be falling out of the sky on New York City any day now and drive a much more aggressive line with North Korea? So that's what I'll be listening to in the State of the Union, and I'm unfortunately not all that confident that even the Air Force General's assessment here is going to drive policy decision making.
Yeah, I'm betting he buries it and doubles down. That's where I'll put my money. What it is, though. Luke, I appreciate the time. Great talking with you, man.
Thanks, Rick.
Always good to talk to our friend Luke Vargas. Talk Media News. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Radio of, for, and by we the working people. The Rick Smith Show.
The animals, trap till the cages fall. The cages fall, stay awake in the dark, count mistakes. The light was off.
Sanity for a change. The Rick Smith Show.
The day is new. And everyone is waiting on you. And you got time.
Well, apparently time has run out on the people of Puerto Rico. I guess on Wednesday, FEMA is going to say, we're done. All done. Yep, all done. Officially shutting off, closing down, moving along. Now, just 4 months. Just 4 months ago, you had Hurricane Maria come through and basically level the entire island. And even today, the reports coming out are, between 70 and 90% of the people still don't have running water or electricity or just reasonable living conditions. And yet the Federal Emergency Management Agency, which has distributed some 30 million gallons of water and nearly 60 million meals, they're saying, well, we're done. Time to go. All over. And you're going, well, hold on, wait a second. There are massive problems, and this is going to play into that frame. That, look, if this was Greenwich, Connecticut, if this was, somewhere in Maine, if this were a Lily White neighborhood, would FEMA be running away after just 4 months? How long were they in New Orleans? How long were they in Florida? How long were they were rebuilding? How long? And to now just 4 months go, we're done. All done. Now the politicos in Puerto Rico not thrilled because look, they've got real problems. There's real chaos going on. And yet here again, this is the leadership that we have in Washington, D.C. Just really, I got to be honest, something seriously wrong. And I know there's maybe a thought that, Puerto Rico isn't part of the U.S. and, that's their problem. Let them deal with it. But this isn't how you react. This isn't what you let happen to your fellow citizens. It's just, literally speechless when you look at this. Literally speechless that they're just packing up ship and going, we're done. While you still have most of the rural municipalities struggling We will see. We'll see how this works out. Anyway, if you're listening to a station that only picks up the first hour, head on over to the ricksmithshow.com to pick up the second hour. You can also get the podcast at thericksmithshow.com. For everyone else, stick around. Right back after this.
Controversial, thought-provoking, opinionated. Rick Smith.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com. Back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. One of the quotes that jumped out at me from the Trump speech or the excerpts that I've seen is, "I'm extending an open hand to work with members of both party, Democrats and Republicans, to protect our citizens of every background, color, and creed." And I got to be honest with you, the fact that FEMA is leaving Puerto Rico after just 4 months, I gotta question that comment, that statement right from the start. I'll tell you, it's been a rough year, and I don't know that it gets any better. And here to talk about the state of the nation, where we are, where we're going, what we're doing, and really the sanity of our leaders, our good friend Propane Jane. Jane, thanks for taking time for us.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me back.
So you buying any of this? We're gonna open hand. He's open hand reaching across to those Democrats, and we don't care about your color, your creed, none of that stuff. We're going to open hand.
Oh my gosh, so many lies have been told tonight. I actually started out watching as part of a panel on Twitter, and it's for a good cause. Actually, we're just sort of rating the statements. The hashtag is Trumpometer 2018. And essentially, whenever we all register either BS or scary on our meter, it triggers a fundraising alert, basically, for Democratic candidates that are running. So we're trying to kind of turn this into a good cause, because what else can you do? I mean, I feel like people on both sides already feel the way they feel about this man and this administration in this past year. And I don't think, no matter what narrative gets spun in the mainstream media, I don't think that one speech is going to change how people feel about what's happening on a day-to-day basis.
So what you're saying is you're not expecting anyone to do the Van Jones and say tonight he became presidential. We're not expecting that.
I think that people are very cautious. I actually tweeted out a story today about Jeffrey Toobin from CNN, saying that he feels responsible for the role he played in sort of this like false equivalence between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton on CNN. And, suddenly people sort of realize, like, oh, wait a minute. Yeah, some of this stuff that he's doing really is not okay. And how much did I make it seem like it was going to be okay before all of this started? And so, yeah, I'm hoping that people are more cautious about declaring him presidential while we continue to see him refusing to implement the sanctions. Like you said, basically doing everything that is the opposite of what he's claiming to be doing in this speech tonight.
Yeah, because I'm being flooded with all the presidential said, the president said this, and here's the record, and what he's saying, just down the list. How he does the most for veterans, does the most anybody's ever done, and yet to get the veterans community going, where? Did we miss it?
I mean, he got me from, I mean, you know, like Jerry Maguire, he had me at hello, right? Because, I mean, he started out with Hurricane Harvey. So as a Houstonian, you know, my ears perked up. And just for him to even start there, and certainly all due respect to the first responder that he highlighted, I mean, certainly I think the handlers that were allowed to craft this speech certainly knew to incorporate some of those, you know, very salient kind of feel-good moments that we're used to seeing at the State of the Union address. But the problem is that when you actually think about, again, and like you said in the opening, in regards to this announcement just today about them pulling out of Puerto Rico, we know how much they don't have, you know, power. They still don't have power. They still don't have water. I mean, so many people are having to just move to Florida, actually. That they're just leaving as like a disaster area because there's nothing being done to get them back up and running. And as a Houstonian, I mean, even there are parts around Houston that still people aren't getting the assistance that they need.
Yeah, well, those are just poor people. We don't care about them.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I guess that's sort of the phantom, you know, a narrative that they want to have. But, you know, I actually was just looking at state-by-state data from Gallup about his approval rating. And he is actually below 40% in the great state of Texas. You know, Texas is right there with California and New York in terms of, you know, just the sheer level of disapproval with this man. So I think a lot of that does have to do with the response to the climate disasters. I think a lot of it also has to do with this wall, this atrocious wall idea. And, you know, there's a lot of Texans that are supposed to end up on the Mexico side of the wall based on where they're saying that they're going to build it, and they're Trump voters, actually, that are upset about it. So I think behind the scenes, there's an antidote for everything he's claiming to be doing where, you know, on the ground, people actually know that he's not doing it.
Yeah, but here's my problem is you know, while that may be true, you still have the knuckle draggers and the mouth breathers, you know, just, you know, Trump, buying every word of this, buying every bit of it. You know, the people who only watch Fox News and only get information from their echo chamber. This speech, you know, everything's rosy, everything's fabulous. He's the greatest.
Yeah, but that's always. I mean, what else are they going to say, right? I mean, they're not going to come out there and say, this is the guy who has an approval rating in the 30s. I mean, the low to mid 30s, and has consistently had that low of an approval rating basically the entire time that he's been there. That literally we're talking about his attempts to obstruct justice on numerous occasions. We're talking about these memos. We're talking about an FBI investigation. We're talking about dossiers and new dossiers. And, I mean, there's all of this going on in the midst of, like, this moment, you know, where he's having to sort of appear to be legitimate and presidential. But what's happening outside of those walls that they're in right now, it's a you know what storm.
Yeah, you know, let me ask you that, because since you brought up the memos, and obviously the Republicans have released their version of events and their memo to the White House, and they're saying that they're not sure that the White House is going to release it to the general public. I'm curious, as those walls, you know, close in on him, you know. Do we expect Rosenstein to be fired? Do we expect Mueller to get fired? Do we expect, you know, the Saturday Night Massacre? Are we expecting that kind of outlash, or, you know, that lashing out, or what can we expect?
I mean, I think we have to expect anything. We have to be ready for anything. This is a man who doesn't abide by rules and regulations. We talked about this, you know, probably within the first month of this administration last year, that by definition, throughout his life, he doesn't see himself as needing to comply with like these rules that everybody else is going along with.
Yeah,
He
that's just for you
accepts
poor
the
people.
rules.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
just,
exactly.
But you know, one of the things that caught my attention today, and again, you know, it's I said this earlier. I have this version of Trump that anything that goes in his ears eventually shoots right out his mouth before he thinks about it. And evidently, he was making remarks at a private lunch, and he said, "I would love to be able to bring our country into a great form of unity." But he goes on to say, without a major event where people pull together, that's hard to do. And then he, the caveat, but I'd like to do it without the major event and all that stuff. The fact that came out of his mouth, I got to tell you, sent chills down my spine. As are we ready for another who knows what? To get just as the next distraction.
Yeah, I mean, you have kids, right? I mean, do you remember when they were like 3 years old?
I do. I wish they were 3 years old now.
Do you?
I do.
I know. But do you remember that phase where, like, they could walk, obviously, they were, like, potty trained, they could, fully explore their environment, and they sort of would just test the limits of, like, how far they could go.
Yep.
Right? And 3-year-olds are pretty good at, like, testing those limits as far as they can actually go until someone says, no, you can't do that. Or, comes and picks them up or puts them in a different place or changes the environment in some way.
Right. Mom gave all 3 kids a healthy dose of vitamin No.
Exactly. And so with Trump, you have to think of, like Schoolhouse Rock. I mean, theoretically, his parents should be the legislative branch and the judicial branch. Theoretically, right? But he just so happens to be in a situation where, his party controls, quote unquote, all 3 branches of government. And so what is their check and balance on what he's doing? And what cues are they giving him in terms of, okay, it's okay if you do this, it's not okay if you do this. And if you think back to when he had his spat with Jeff Sessions, and he called him an idiot. I forgot exactly what he said about him, but it was pretty harsh. And from all outward appearances, he wanted to get rid of Jeff Sessions, right? But then the establishment GOP was like, hey, that would just be a bridge too far. And what happened?
He stepped back.
Yeah, he stepped back, and Jeff Sessions is still there.
Yeah, somebody told him no. Wow.
Exactly. Somebody told him no, and the people who told him no were his, mommy and daddy, his, the Republican Party, basically. And so the really, I think frightening thing right now is that when it comes to Mueller, when it comes to Rosenstein, when it comes to that whole Russia probe, the Republican Party is like, it's like it's very mealy-mouthed in terms of like where it stands in terms of a boundary with him about that. There's some of them that are kind of egging him on. Obviously, you have the Republicans in the House that are, trying to get this memo out and doing things that aren't necessarily even clear that they're even to Trump's benefit. Even though Trump is, acting like he wants this thing to happen. Ultimately, it may come out that it actually proves that he was even more, this is more proof of his obstruction of justice. But then you have people in the Senate that sort of have sense enough to know who their colleagues are across the aisle in the Senate, and that they really do see this, as Claire McCaskill said today, as a constitutional crisis. And that if he does do something like that, that they will sort of, do this nuclear option, or basically take it to the next level of check and balance.
I hope so. I got to be honest. I hope so, because I saw the statement from McConnell today saying that, well, we don't see any reason. We haven't heard that he's going to do any of that stuff, so there's no reason for us to act. And I'm going, that kind of thinking scares me because, look, I fully expect the firings to happen.
Yeah, that's like if you say, like if you go over to somebody's house and they have a dog and you're like, hey, does your dog bite? And they don't immediately say no, and they're kind of like, just kind of depends on, I mean, that doesn't really make you feel comfortable, like you want to really go and sit down in that house, And so I think when they kind of equivocate and do this kind of, I guess, backpedaling in some ways, I think it's I think it should make us be very anxious about what's going to happen.
Yeah.
'Cause I don't think you can trust what they're going to do.
No, I haven't trusted the Republican Party in a good portion of my life. So nothing new, but to be honest, I haven't really trusted the Democrats all that much either. But here's the question. We have all of this angst. We have all of this uncertainty. We've got all of this chaos. All of this stuff's going on. I still have faith in us and we the people, nation of, for, and by we the people. What kind of organizing do you think people should be doing if they're not, and what kind of organizing do you see going on that you think is good?
Well, I mean, I definitely think like this thing we're doing tonight in terms of fundraising and just getting the word out about who the candidates are and what districts they run in and what their values are. And I think, a lot of times when you talk to people who are sort of disengaged from politics, a lot of times they'll say, I don't really, maybe they don't ascribe to a party, but they want to kind of just stick to the issues and the issues are important to them. And what I see happening, I think, a lot now is because so many new people are running for office and so many people have been inspired by this last year of this administration, so many people have been inspired to run and inspired to join the political process, that they don't necessarily, sort of have this, like, affiliation with a party structure, and they are kind of a new person, and they do have to say, okay, this is where I stand on the issues, because they may not necessarily fit with, like, what the establishment party line has been. And so I do think that the more people are getting out and getting their message on social media, just to talk about where they stand on some of these really important issues right now. I mean, I think immigration is really galvanizing people's attention, obviously, because this is what we're dealing with right now. But what's coming out of that, I think, is people taking a very clear stance on certain issues. And then people knowing, like, okay, hey, this is who I want to align with, and I think that helps tremendously.
It's bringing back that kind of participatory democracy, the idea of an active, informed, engaged electorate, which is always exciting. But here's the thing, and this is one of the things that bothers me. I don't know if you saw the story the other day. You've got the Koch brothers who are, they're talking about spending in excess of $400 million on this next election cycle. So you guys doing a little bit of fundraising is a great thing. But, and I've always argued, look, they have all the money. We've outprocreated them. I got to be honest, their money seems to be beating us.
Well, I think that there are limitations to money. And I certainly think that what we saw with the 2012 election between Barack Obama and Mitt Romney, that people can actually spend tons of money and still lose. And again, keep in mind that, even though Hillary Clinton, quote unquote, lost, she won by almost 3 million more votes. So at the same time, I think that what we need to be focused on is not necessarily the idea that, of course, yes, they are going, ever since Citizens United, they are going to, have all these billionaires giving them tons of money. But the other issue is the voter suppression. And the fact that they're using this money to basically get people into office who are going to support more restrictive, attacks on our voting rights, which basically limits our ability to get the Republicans out of office. And when you also think about the fact that Trump, as well as the establishment Republican Party, is really not taking any interest in preventing Russian interference in our election. That it becomes a so much bigger issue aside from the money, because we actually know that we have, like, cyber attacks happening and potential hacking of the actual vote. and that this is what, the Russia probe is actually even about. And so on the one hand, we're not even, again, we're dealing with someone who, in Trump, who is not even imposing the sanctions that were, voted on by both houses of Congress. And basically just saying, like, okay, Russia, yeah, you hacked our election, or it's like not even acknowledging that they did that in some ways. It's letting them off the hook.
Without a slap on the wrist.
Yeah, with nothing. After, this is what the country and our elected officials actually agreed upon doing. And the whole reason why collusion and this Mueller investigation is even happening is because, again, we don't want someone serving as our president who has been influenced by a foreign adversary. And what better way to influence than, wanting to have sanctions against your country lifted and installing someone in office who is going to lift those sanctions or, is not going to impose new sanctions. So, I think that's something that we need to be taking seriously, because I think that's an even bigger assault on our democracy.
I'm right there with you. And
at
the end of it, it's got to come back to us.
Right.
The money's one thing, but it's got to come back to us talking to each other and communicating and breaking down those constructed barriers to sanity, if you will.
I agree.
And it starts with you. Jane, I appreciate the time. Always great having you on the program.
You too. Have a good night.
Thanks so much. Our good friend Propane Jane. You want to check out her stuff? We'll get a link at thericksmithshow.com of how you can do that. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 2011. That was the day California first celebrated its state holiday, known as Fred Korematsu Day of Civil Liberties and the Constitution. Born on January 30th, 1919, Fred Korematsu was among those victimized by President Roosevelt's wartime executive order 9066, mandating Japanese-American internment. Born in Oakland, California, Korematsu worked as a shipyard welder. He was arrested and eventually convicted after refusing to report to authorities for internment. The ACLU took up his case, hoping to test the legality of 9066. Korematsu and his family were relocated to the Central Utah Wars Relocation Center in Topaz, Utah. There he worked 8 hours a day for $12 a month and waited for his case to travel through the legal system. It eventually reached the U.S. Supreme Court. In Korematsu versus United States, the court held that compulsory exclusion, though constitutionally suspect, is justified during circumstances of emergency and peril. After his release, Korematsu worked odd jobs and faced discrimination and wage theft. He eventually resettled in Oakland with his wife and children. In 1983, Korematsu's conviction was finally vacated. 15 years later, he was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom. He became a tireless activist for civil liberties and worked to ensure internment could never happen again. Before his death in 2005, he served on the Constitution Project's Liberty and Security Committee. He warned, quote, "No one should ever be locked away simply because they share the same race, ethnicity, or religion as a spy or terrorist. If that principle was not learned from the internment of Japanese Americans, then these are very dangerous times for our democracy." Fred Korematsu Day is also celebrated in Hawaii, Virginia, and Florida. Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind, you can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Interesting news coming out of Indiana. Evidently, Indianapolis is giving up on, or actually, Indianapolis has been pulled out of the Amazon HQ2 race. Because guess what? The legislature wanted to push their homophobic agenda through the legislature. And evidently Amazon wants to choose a community that has values that value diversity and equality, and Indianapolis evidently does not meet that. So there you go. You remember yesterday we talked a little bit about the former CEO of Home Depot, who was saying that Democrats need to use their stupid brains. Because all of these benevolent companies are giving out, thousands of dollars and it's bonus time and all that. Well, it's now come out what exactly Home Depot is giving out. It's not $1,000 for everyone. It's up to $1,000 based on your years of service. If you've been there less than 2 years or less, it's $200. And you could go up by $50. And, if you've been there 10 years, you get 10 to 14 years, you get $400. 15 to 19 years, you get $750. And if you've been there longer than 20 years, that's where you get the $1,000. And, I said from the beginning, a $200 bonus, $300 bonus is not a lot of money. I know. Use my stupid brain. To someone, it's $300, and $300 is something. It's money. You need it, but it's not a wage increase. It's a one-time gimmick here. Congratulations, you're going to get it's not coming back next year. It's not coming back the year after. It's not coming back the year after. If you remember the Bush years, we all got the $300 Bush prize, and everyone was ecstatic. And what did we end up with? Deeper in debt. And the thing that gets me is you look at the fact that we knew before these tax cuts were passed, we knew what they were going to be. We knew that they were going to enrich CEOs. We knew there were going to be more stock buybacks. We knew there were going to be layoffs. We knew it was basically going to be a debt reduction for corporations. And guess what? It is exactly what we said it was going to be. This latest CNBC poll of economists and managers and investment managers and all these people are saying, look, 36% of them are saying it's going back. It's going to shares of in buybacks. 36% will go to that. 13% will go to debt reduction. 23% go to capital improvements, to investments. Only 12% last. 12% is going to go to wages. And part of that is this bonus. So here's the bonus, 12%. It's not the 70 to 80 cents on the dollar that we were told by the Trump administration and the Trump economists that it was going to be. There are people who I've talked to who said that they were going to get a $4,000 raise, a $4,000 check. That it was going to be amazing. And yet that's not going to happen. And I think now people are waking up to this, and I hope at least waking up to this, that understand in a decade, more than half of us are going to see our taxes go up, and considerably. 82% of the gains here are going to the 1%. I live in a reasonable neighborhood. I don't live in a neighborhood with the 1%. And the thing is what we're being sold and what's being rammed down our throat and what's being pushed at us is that these companies are just, these benevolent corporations are just heaping reward upon its workforce. It's not. These tax cuts are not being trickled down. And look, did we not know this? Did we not talk about this? Basically ad nauseum the whole 3 weeks they rammed this through. And the answer is yes. But it's one of those things where at some point you go, we knew, but you got to keep pointing it out so that the next time, and understand, they're going to do it again. And they're going to do it again. And they're going to do it again until we wake up and go, no more, stop. I mean, it's just mind blowing. I mean, and look, again, we knew. I mean, the Washington Post pointed out just 10%. 10%, that's the share that's going to go directly into the middle class. 10%. And yet you had Trump, who came out today and said, this tax cut, it's for the middle class. We're helping the middle class. And you go, no, not really. When you look at the reality that by 2027, less than a decade down the road, 54% of us are going to be paying higher taxes. That's going to happen. 82%, almost 83% going to the top 1%. At what point do you go, we got screwed? At what point do we go, no more? And the thing that bothers me is the Trumpian nationalism that we see here at home is being exported. A friend of mine sent me a story coming out of Canada. Evidently, the Canadian labor movement is being split into pieces as we speak based on these hyper-nationalist lines. And you know what? They want the U.S. out. This Unifor union, which is the largest union of private sector workers in Canada, they're saying, look, we need to expel all those American unions, get rid of all of them, and they're raiding other unions just all the time, causing all this chaos. Because there's this hatred of us going on around the world. And why? Because of, what's coming out of our White House, what's coming out of our politics, and the kind of hyper-nationalism that we're exuding to everyone else. Look, I'm as nationalistic as anyone. I believe we should be, building our own cars and creating our own steel and having our own infrastructure. And when we build a bridge, the cement and everything should be made here and help reverberate it through our economy. Much like I believe in Canada, they should be doing the same thing. I'm a big fan of domestic production for domestic consumption. But at some point, you've got to reach across the borders and talk to unions and workers in other countries to make sure that everyone is able to fight these huge multinational corporations. And congratulations. American business has done a fabulous job of not only dividing the American labor movement, but now apparently dividing the Canadian labor movement. And again, up there where union density is about 30% of the workforce, they still have a strong, vibrant labor movement with a prosperous middle class. This kind of fracture, this kind of divide, this kind of wedge between the labor movement in Canada does not bode well for Canadian workers. And it's just a continuation of the race to the bottom that's going on here in the U.S. as, for 30, 40 years, wages have been stagnant. And again, still stagnant because all you got was a $250 bonus instead of the raise. And next year, you're going to go back and go, hey, where's my bonus? There's no bonus. That was a PR stunt, don't you know? And a really good PR stunt. I'll give them credit. They're good at it. They're good at the PR, man. We're just we're the adults who fall for it. And you got to go, when does it stop? The hope is it stops now. It stops in 2018. It stops at the polls this coming November, as we throw every person who voted for this tax bill should be out on their ear. Every one of them. Every one of them should be on an unemployment line somewhere, on the Coke bread line, if you will. Let them have them. We'll take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk about this weekend, the big Pennsylvania Progressive Summit. Keystone Progress has been doing this, I think it's like 10, 11 years now. It's always a great affair. We always go out and we talk to people, and it's a great weekend, and I look forward to it. When we come back, we're going to talk to their executive director right after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Do you believe in climate change?
Debunking President Trump's latest lies and disinformation on climate science.
The United States is not just exporting energy.
We're exporting freedom.
The U.S. is now importing less oil than ever before, thanks to Obama. EPA reversal on Pebble Mine is qualified good news for Alaska. Plus,
while the main impetus for this year's forward movement of the clock was the perilous nuclear situation, climate change very much remains a serious and worsening threat.
Thanks to Trump, the doomsday clock has now been moved up to 2 minutes to midnight.
Thanks, Trump. All of those stories and more straight ahead from BradBlog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
There is a cooling and there's a heating.
Oh, Jesus, God in heaven. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, the President of the United States, went on British TV and made a complete jackass out of himself and these United States.
Yes, he did. In a semi-coherent interview on Sunday with Piers Morgan for Britain's ITV, Trump exposed his complete ignorance of climate science and U.S. climate policies. You could see his mind reaching to remember what he's been told by Fox News as he lied about how the term climate change was coined, lied about the melting ice caps, and exposed his ignorance on science, which would be comical if it weren't so dangerous.
Do you believe in climate change? Do you think it exists?
There is a cooling and there's a heating. I mean, look, it used to not be climate change. It used to be global warming, right? The ice caps were going to melt. They were going to be gone by now, but now they're setting records, okay? They're at a record level.
Okay, so the ice caps are setting records, but it's for melting. According to NASA, sea ice at both poles hit record lows last year. That's both the Arctic and the Antarctic. And it's been called climate change for more than a century.
You mean they didn't just come up with that because global warming was no longer working?
No, certainly not. And NASA, just over a week ago, announced that 2017 was the second hottest year ever recorded. So no, the nonstop upward temperature trend for the planet that has been going on for decades continues.
Well, who listens to him? He's only the president of the United States.
And I just want to note for the record that corporate media needs to stop fixating on whether Republican politicians believe in climate change, and they need to start asking what they plan to do about it.
Good point.
Meanwhile, some good news for Alaskans. In a surprise reversal late Friday, the Trump Environmental Protection Agency announced that it will restore Obama-era restrictions blocking the controversial proposed Pebble Mine.
What?
A massive copper and gold mine that the Obama EPA had determined would irreparably harm the pristine Bristol Bay watershed, home to the world's largest salmon fishery. However, Think Progress reports that EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt did not outright ban the proposed mine. Instead, Pruitt's statement says, quote, "The decision neither deters nor derails the application process of the Pebble Partners proposed project."
So here we're trying to give some credit for something to Scott Pruitt at the EPA. We can't even do that, huh?
Unfortunately, no. Alaska, however, may get an exemption from the Trump administration's plan to expand offshore drilling. That's because the state's Republican senators and Republican House representative have asked Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke to remove much of Alaska's waters from the offshore expansion, similar to how Florida's Republican Governor Rick Scott asked for Florida to be excused.
Funny how that happens.
Meanwhile, the U.S. is importing less oil than ever before. Net imports of crude oil products into the United States has dropped to the lowest level on record since 1973. And according to U.S. Energy Secretary Rick Perry at the World Economic Forum in Davos,
we are now the #1 oil and gas producing nation on the face of the earth.
That's thanks to the surge in domestic shale oil production begun under the Obama administration. The Trump administration is pushing the world now to use more oil and export even more of our climate disaster to the world, directly contradictory to climate scientists' warnings that we must get to net zero carbon emissions as soon as possible to avoid catastrophic impacts.
Well,
there is a cooling and there's a heating.
Which brings us to the doomsday clock, the iconic symbol that represents the likelihood of man-made global catastrophe, which last week the scientists at the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists moved up to 2 minutes to midnight for the first time since 1953. In doing so, the Bulletin scientists condemned not only President Trump's aggressive rhetoric on nuclear weapons and North Korea, But climate scientist Sivan Kartha, a member of the Bulletin's board, also put the blame squarely on Donald Trump's rollback of U.S. climate policies.
And of course, he also formally declared his intention to withdraw from the Paris Climate Agreement. In other words, the U.S. president has done his best to follow through on his stated intention of derailing U.S. climate action.
Promises made, promises kept. For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Don't forget you can download our reports anytime via Stitcher, TuneIn, or iTunes. Find us, follow us, and share us worldwide on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
After midnight, we're gonna let it all hang down. After midnight, we're gonna chug it up and shout.
The proud defender of the American dream, Rick Smith.
So I'm really excited about this weekend. The folks at Keystone Progress are putting on the Pennsylvania Progressive Summit, and this has been like it's got to be 11, 12 years they've been doing this now, and I think we've made every one of them. We go out and we have a great time talking to people, do interviews. We got a lot of stuff that we want to do this time around. And it's always a great coming together of the minds. And also you get to meet folks from across the country. They have great keynote speakers and folks that come in and give classes and expose us to different ideas and organizing opportunities and networking. It's fabulous. And I hope people will check it out. PAProgressivesummit.net's the website. But I've got the executive director of Keystone Progress, the good folks who put this on the line. Daniel Dubé is the executive director there. Daniel, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, thanks, Rick. Thank you so much. We're really excited about this weekend, and we're excited to have you there again.
Yeah, it's always great because, look, at the end of the day, it's this kind of organizing that I've been saying for a long time has to happen. You have to come together, find best practices, find partners, and build coalitions and do all of that stuff. And this weekend in Harrisburg, a good place for that to start.
Yeah, we're really excited. This year's theme is from protest to power. Obviously, we're in the midst of what we like to call a whirlwind moment. There's been an incredible outpouring of activism and new engagement in our democracy. And this is a time for us to think strategically because this year has the potential to completely transform Pennsylvania and really the country. And so we've got over 24 sessions that we're going to be having people come to, workshops, and, of course, our keynote speakers. And it's a really great opportunity for people across the state to meet activists and community members, leaders, and elected officials who are working to make progress for working people across Pennsylvania.
You guys have been doing this, 11, 12 years now, right?
I think the number is 9. So I've been to 4 of them. I came onto staff 3 years ago as an organizer, and we've done them at least the last 4 years have been in Harrisburg. We did a couple in Philly and Pittsburgh. Harrisburg seems to be the sweet spot to get the most folks out.
Yeah, you get people from all across the state to come in, and as the ones I've gone to in the past, as I've said, I've got to meet some really great activists and people who are engaged in their community, and that's kind of what I'm hoping for you out of this. There are a lot of, like I said, a lot of great classes, a lot of great opportunities, but it's that bit of activism that I think if people don't know where to start, this would be a good place, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think, there's a lot of people who've taken action for the first time, calling their congressman for the first time or their senator, and we have an opportunity to go beyond that this year with the election. The big word of 2017 was definitely resistance. A couple other words I want to bring into the lexicon I'm hoping that we can learn from. First and foremost, I think it's solidarity. The idea that, the struggle that someone's facing in Philadelphia is tied exactly to the struggle someone's facing in my hometown of Meadville or in Erie or in Scranton, or in Seattle, Washington, or across the globe. So I think, as we're bringing people together, I think the more that we can define, what our challenges are, and the more that we can see, exactly, what our tactics need to be, we can build toward victory. And really what we're missing in Pennsylvania is power. We need to make sure we have power to not only move our ideas forward, but to hold, our good elected officials accountable once they get into office. And so, we've got participation from a lot of peer organizations, We've got District Attorney Larry Krasner, who's an example of somebody. I don't know if you know the story of Larry Krasner. He's the district attorney, new district attorney in Philadelphia. He was somebody who the lawyer that people called during protests. He was recruited by a number of activists there in Philly to be the district attorney to reform criminal justice. And it's a perfect example of how we can build a movement, this movement that we're building, into real governing power. And I'm excited for people to hear from Larry and his story and how he won his victory, and how we can replicate that all across the state of Pennsylvania and the country.
And in his victory, I saw the story also of him coming in and basically just cleaning house, and moving that district attorney's office in a direction that is, pro community, pro people, and not as corrupt as it has been in the past.
Yes, totally. And in addition to that, what doesn't make the headlines is he's got a co-governing model. He works with community partners, community groups like Reclaim Philadelphia, Power, the ACLU, so that he can move in a way that's in line with what the community needs. Those are the folks that put him into office, and they continue to work with him as now that he's taken hold. And it's really, it's going to change people's lives. And that's really what it's all about at the end of the day, is making tangible improvements in people's lives.
If someone still wants to go, is there still room?
Yeah, there's still tickets available. We sold out last year at the last minute. We're likely to do the same. Folks can go to paprogressivesummit.net or to kpsummit.eventbrite.com.
We'll make sure we get links to the ricksmithshow.com, because the hope is that folks show up. I know last year, as you said, it was packed. And also this year, you're going to have the lieutenant governor's debate, of which, I don't know how you're going to pull this off with as many people are into this. But that's kind of an exciting thing as well.
Yeah, I think the lieutenant governor of Pennsylvania does not have a tremendous amount of governing power, but certainly they have responsibilities, and certainly it's one of the most competitive races that we're looking at across the state of Pennsylvania. And so we want to make sure that that every single candidate has their ability to make their voice heard, share their vision for Pennsylvania, and that people can ask their questions. I think we want to provide a level of accessibility that the questions there's going to be a couple coming from me, but the bulk of them are going to come from the audience, so that we can get a real sense of people's vision. And I think that's the thing where we're at right now, Rick, is that we can set an agenda based on our best imaginations, and that those true policies that will help us as individuals will help many people and will resound. And if we take that vision into November, there's no way we can't be victorious.
I mean, and again, November being the key point. I mean, all this chaos that we're seeing, coming out of Washington, coming out of Harrisburg, coming out of state houses across the country, November is the opportunity to right the ship.
That's right. I mean, every time we have an election, we have an opportunity to change everything. And so much of the groundwork that's happening now across the country and across Pennsylvania, is really building towards November. And so, we're going to have panels on, literally how to run from office. We're going to hear from candidates running for state house, people who are inspired by this resistance movement, who are running for the first time. And we're going to hear from their campaign staff who won victories last year in new elections with new candidates. And it's a real opportunity for people to step up, with the redistricting lawsuit and the way that's going. We could have a complete shakeup of the Pennsylvania's delegation to the federal government.
I'm looking forward to it, and it all starts this weekend in Harrisburg at the Pennsylvania Progressive Summit put on by the good folks at Keystone Progress. Again, paprogressivesummit.net, the website, if you want to check that out, you want to attend. There's still tickets available, still opportunities to come out and see Daniel and to see me and to see all of the other folks who are going to be there. Last word, Daniel. Give me the pitch on why we need to be there.
The summit is only possible with grassroots activists. You're the people that are listening, the people that are out there. You're the reason we put it on, and it won't be the same without you. So, make sure you get over to the website, get registered, and we look forward to seeing you there this weekend. Good stuff, Daniel. I appreciate it. I look forward to seeing you over the weekend. Hey, thanks, Rick. Thanks so much for this opportunity. Yeah, anytime. Appreciate it. Again, paprogressivesummit.net. Go there, sign up, show up. Look, at the end of the day, that's what it's about. It's about standing up. It's about showing up. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For working people. Come to talk.
Think of all the roads. Think of all their crossings. Taking steps is easy. Standing still is hard. Remember all their failures. second time around.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1992. That was the day the gravediggers of Chicago ended their 43-day strike. The United Press International's headline declared, "The dead will rest in peace now that Chicago area gravediggers have reached a tentative contract." The gravediggers were part of Service Employees International Union Local 106. The strike started on December 20th, when workers at 4 Chicago area cemeteries walked off the job. At issue was wages, overtime, and health benefits. 22 other local cemeteries then locked out their workers. With the gravediggers on strike and locked out, more than 1,000 burials were delayed. The Chicago Rabbinical Society was able to get a court order for some of the burials to go forward due to Orthodox Jewish practice that requires burial within 24 hours. By the time the strike was settled, 300 burials were still waiting. Unless there is a labor dispute, grave digging is work that does not often find itself in the headlines. It is one of the many unsung types of labor that it takes to keep a big city like Chicago operating. In 1974, the famous radio host Studs Terkel published a book based on oral histories he had conducted with working people over the course of 3 years. The title of the book was simply Working. The book featured interviews that ranged from jazz musicians to pharmacists, farmers to welders. One of the most poignant interviews was with a gravedigger named Elmer Ruiz. Ruiz said, "I usually wear myself some black sunglasses. I never go to a funeral without sunglasses. It's a good idea because your eyes is the first thing that shows when you have a big emotion. Always these black sunglasses."
From United Nations headquarters in New York, this is your World in 2 Minutes. I'm your host, Luke Farkas, for Talk Media News. As President Trump arrives at the World Economic Forum in Davos, some of America's closest allies are seeking to distance themselves from Trump's policies. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau of Canada used his speech to delegates to make it clear Canada would not be following in America's footsteps on corporate tax cuts. Instead, he had these words for large corporations.
We're in a new age of doing business. You need to give back.
Meanwhile, President Emmanuel Macron of France promised his country would entirely phase out coal power in the coming years.
We will close all our coal-fired power stations by 2021.
Trump is scheduled to address the World Economic Forum on Friday. The United Nations is convening the Syrian government and opposition groups for peace talks in Vienna on Thursday. It's the 9th time in the almost 7-year Syrian war the UN has tried to put an end to the crisis. UN officials describe the meetings as a critical moment for peace, but it's unlikely the 9th round of talks will prove the charm. Russia is convening peace talks of its own next week in Sochi, where President Assad's allies are likely to far outnumber opposition figures, and the topics of debate won't include Assad's potential removal from office. And the European Union will spend more than $700 million to connect Spain and France with a state-of-the-art electricity grid, allowing the countries to share excess capacity. The new grid will involve the laying of underwater power cables and could benefit the Spanish solar industry, which often generates and ends up wasting more power than the country can use. Additional projects being funded by the EU will help distribute wind power generated along Germany's northern coast to the south of the country. For more global news headlines, visit TalkMediaNews.com.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
To this battle, take my Union gun. Gonna end this world of slavery, for this war is one you're bound to lose. Are you fascists or bound?
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So again, another one of those studies. And, you know, it's one of these things that you got to have these studies. You got to have them in hand. You got to have the facts. You got to have the hard data, the numbers to fit, you know, exactly what is. Ask me what happens when a state does away with their prevailing wage laws, and I'll tell you. You get shoddy building, you get lower wages, You get transient labor. You get no savings for taxpayers. And you get all of the negatives and none of the positives, other than you have a compliant and desperate workforce. And that's really what it's about. This is, anytime you hear someone talking about prevailing wage and doing away with it, it's someone who just wants to kick labor in the knee, who just wants workers working for lower wages. So the good folks at the Illinois Economic Policy Institute, they have come up with one of these studies. The Midwest Economic Policy Institute, along with Colorado State University economics professor Kevin Duncan, they've come up with a new piece of study on this piece of research that looked at over 900 projects and 900 bids on 335 construction projects in Indiana. Indiana was the last state that I know of that did away with the prevailing wage. You look at Wisconsin, they did it. All the horrible stuff. But Indiana is the place where this is what they've done. These were the bids. These were the construction costs. And what they found was right in line with what I said. Wages dropped by 8.5%. Income inequality grew larger between the lowest paid construction workers and everyone else. You saw over a 15% wage drop for the lowest paid construction workers. The skills of the workers, their skills dropped because what you saw is more construction workers without advanced training, without high school or a high school diploma or a GED or any of that. You saw, the number of veterans getting jobs in the construction industry going down. You saw projects taking longer to get done. You had more turnover. You had, slower job growth, and all right down the list. And oh, by the way, he still didn't have any real bid competition. There was no bidding each other down, and there was no statistical impact on the cost of building these buildings. And again, it comes back down to something very simple in my view, which is this is just an attack on the middle class. Here where I'm at in Pennsylvania, they've been wanting to destroy the baby bacon, the prevailing wage law here for forever, as long as I can remember. In fact, I was thinking back this afternoon. One of the first public kind of debate things I did 10 years ago was against an ABC guy arguing prevailing wage. And at the time we were talking about the study that had happened out in the Midwest, in Iowa and, the Midwest states, because they had all gone a rash of undoing it. And what they saw is they saw their construction industry dry up. They saw the people with the skills, very highly skilled construction workers who were saying, you know what, screw this working 6 months a year, being laid off 6 months a year. I'm going to go get a regular job because I've got skills to do it. So what you ended up seeing was, well, you had an unskilled construction craft and you had a lot of transient labor coming through. So the people who came threw up a building. They didn't care whether the roof had fallen. Hell, it's not their kids. They don't care. And they moved on to the next one to where they could hurry up, throw something up, and make as much money as they could. And yet again, we keep going back through this. And we haven't learned the lesson. Actually, Indiana was the first of the states to recently do this, along with West Virginia, Kentucky, Wisconsin, and Arkansas. And again, I keep coming back to when do we learn the lesson that what the conservative pro-business folks are peddling, what they're trying to ram down our throats, not good for us. Good for them, means more profit. Because understand, the bids didn't come down. The cost to the taxpayer didn't come down. What came down were the wages of the workforce. Skilled workers saw their wages drop 8.5%. The unskilled laborers saw their wages drop 15%. Where did that 8.5%, where did that 15% go? Went into the pockets of the contractors. Went into the pockets of the corporations. Where didn't it go? Into the communities. So that reverberation effect by having those higher wages in the community is completely gone. It's maddening. Anyway, if you missed any of today's program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you go to get the podcast, the Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. As always, you can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Look forward to coming back tomorrow. Lots to talk about with the State of the Union and, well, all of that. We'll see you back here tomorrow.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Together, we can make America better. Email rick@thericksmithshow.com or interact with us anytime at thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show. We're working